Hey guys, today we're going to discuss the new balanced Dataslate and the Munitorum field manual and how it's going to impact the game we all love. I'll start with the balanced Dataslate and then at the end of the video we'll talk points. So firstly, no Armor of Contempt anymore. Armor of Contempt is gone from the game as if it was never there. It's one of the two most all-encompassing changes here in the new rules, apart from the detachment is probably the biggest one. The new Arcs of Omen detachment, I mean. It's going to change the balance of all units in the game very substantially because a lot of factions had Armor of Contempt and those factions who didn't have Armor of Contempt, they also made the lists and chose their units in regards to there being Armor of Contempt on the tabletop. So for those who don't know, Armor of Contempt was the rule that allowed all Space Marine units who don't have Storm Shields or Combat Shields, or I think the shielding on the Dreadknights and a couple of more units, but mostly it's been the Storm Shields who didn't get it. So Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, Death Guard, Thousand Suns, Sisters of Battle, and also the Astra Militarum tanks, they all got the subtract 1 from the AP characteristic of an attack that made against this model or unit. So as you can imagine, a very, very strong rule allowing you to worsen the AP characteristic, and now it's gone. So first of all, Terminators are going to be less scary again. Here are some changes that I think are going to happen. Because Terminators already had a 2-up save, and that brought them to 1-up save, and those Terminators in cover were 0-up, so we have run into some funny situations like the librarian, the Grey Knights librarian I talked about a couple of times, who could actually have with a relic something like a -2 save in cover, which would mean a 2-up save against almost everything in the game, like a Melta shot in the face would also be a 2-up save, which is obviously idiotic. Fortunately, this is not the case anymore. So Space Marine and Astra Militarum tanks, Dreadnoughts, say Space Marine and alike, they now again have a problem with high AP weapons. So before that, AP3 gun like a last cannon would only bring a Dreadnought to a 5-up save. So whether that Dreadnought had a 5-up invulnerable save like a Contempt Dread or not didn't really matter because you could just roll a save. Now you're back to 6-up again, and against AP4 you again don't have any save at all. It means that anything that provides a 5+ or better invulnerable save is back to being extremely valuable. There are several things like my favorite Black Templar's Oath, the Uphold the Honor of the Emperor, which provides a 5-up invulnerable save and a baby transhuman for every unit that has it. And some other things that we have in Space Marine armies and Chaos Space Marines and all that. There are things that provide a 5-up invulnerable save and now, or a better save, and now they are ever more important. Inversely, the high AP weaponry is again very, very strong and important. Provided, yes, we still needed the high AP weapons in the Armor of Contempt era, probably even more than now, because we needed that high AP to actually punch through the armor. But some people like to go the other way and just drown the targets, whichever the target is, in the buckets of shots, making them take those 3+ saves and some other ways to do that. So in any case, high AP weapons back on the table, as strong or even stronger than before. And one thing that makes me happy is that Storm Shields are back to being an absolute must-have wherever you can buy them. So I personally play Deathwatch. If you haven't seen the Deathwatch battle reports I have published recently on the channel, take a look. I have a whole bunch of Storm Shields, and that's not even the maximum. I'm planning to come back to the humongous amount of Storm Shields now that the Armor of Contempt is gone. And I never really liked it in that particular faction that I play. However, in many others I did enjoy it. So we'll have to make some changes in the lists, indubitably. And the Adeptus Custodes armor is back to being the best of the best, because before that, if a Space Marine got shot with an AP1 shot and the Custodian Guard would be in the same situation, they would roll the same save, which is not how it's supposed to be. Custodes armor should be better, straight up in every case. even against AP1. So I know that it's just a formality of the rule, but I appreciate the fact that now it's back to normal in this case. Custodies have finally been unnerved, so the things I've discussed in so many videos about the custodies, the fact that they lacked the OPSEC on the infantry units like the Alaris and Wardens was extremely idiotic, and now we are back to normal in this case. We still don't have OPSEC on the characters, which is probably understandable, though I think that it would be still okay for the Custodies characters to be OPSEC, but it's okay. At least the Alaris and the Wardens are back to having OPSEC as they should always have had. It means that the one-man Alaris units are back to being extremely useful again, and I love that because I really like Alaris, and having them on the tabletop in any fashion is pleasant for my eye. And I highly recommend that as a tactical addition to your force, because it allows you to be in many places at once, which is what Custodies struggle with always. Now that the prices for the sisters have lowered even more, you probably have more points to spare on the sisters to be present with them. However, Alaris have the potential to dip strike behind enemy lines, which is what sisters cannot do. Wardens and Alaris are still underpowered in combat, in my opinion. However, now with Armor of Contempt gone, they're just not as severely underpowered anymore. Custodies also get their stratagems back, so they can use the Emperor's Auspice however many times they want. Same with the Martial Discretion and Esteemed Amalgam stratagems for the Emperor's Chosen. So, for those who don't know, Emperor's Auspice is basically turn off all rerolls against that particular unit of Custodies, and the stratagem only costs 1 CP for a unit of 4 and 2 for a bigger unit, which is just crazy good. It's a very, very strong rule stratagem, especially if used in a proper moment. Just imagine the difference in output between a unit of, say, Warp Talents charging a squad of Custodian Guard with full rerolls to hit from a baton and full rerolls to wound from the claws, and suddenly they don't have any of those rerolls at all, and there is like a -1 to hit on the Custodian's unit in addition to that. That's a lot. That's going to turn the combat in the Custodian's favor massively. The Martial Discretion is almost the same kind of stratagem, but it allows you to turn on the kata that you want on a unit to the same system, and previously you could only do that once per battle. Now you can do it whenever you want. And the Esteemed Amalgam is a stratagem that allows, if you play in Emperor's Chosen, which is their specific strat, you can turn on some others' shield host fighting style instead of the Emperor's Chosen one. Very useful for, say, Solar Watch, Fallback and Charge, or the Shadowkeeper's -1 attack. I am extremely happy for the Custodians. They did not receive any buffs in terms of the points reductions, but the fact that we can now use their most powerful defensive strat again, as always, as we want to. Yes, we still cannot use that on the bikes, but that's okay. The bikes are not there to survive. They're to scare the opponent. So I'm very happy, and the OPSEC part is extremely satisfying as well. Next are the Harley Quinns, and they were nerfed very, very hard. So I remember playing against them right at the start of the Codex, right after the Void Weavers did get a points bump, but before all the other extreme nerfs that they received, and before this one, this huge one. And they were just vicious. I played against them with the best I had at the moment, and it was a death watch list, so I was fighting against Xenos opponents, so I had some buffs on my side with rerolls and etc. But that game was it was a nightmare of a game. And I remember thinking that probably something is wrong with the Harley Quinns, and I actually think that they were one of the most overpowered armies in the most pure sense of the word overpowered. They just did everything that everyone else did, but better, which is a clear indicator that something is wrong. So their invulnerable save across the board was worsened down to a 5+ instead of a 4+. That's just incredible. So instead of half all saves being passed, now only 1/3 of them will be passed. And the difference between a 5-up and a 4-up is very big, especially on 1-wound models. So now anything that shoots more than a couple of bolt shots will be just destroying squads of Harley Quinns, which is probably how it should be, I guess. But I would personally more prefer it to be less drastic and for the price to go up. I know that Games Workshop doesn't like it because they want to sell more models, and that's why they like to nerf stuff instead of bumping the price up, because price up means less models sold. But I would rather want the vehicles to have a 5-up invulnerable save instead of a 4-up, because the versatility, the firepower, and the durability of the Harley Quinn vehicles was one of the most frustrating parts of playing them, and I think that it would be enough with maybe slight price increases to make the vehicles 5-up and the troops 4-up, because that's the combo of relatively hard to deal with troops with extremely hard to deal with vehicles was what made the Harley Quinns such a strong and scary opponent. In any case, it means that now it's going to be much easier to deal with Harley Quinns, plus they got some minor points increases for their pivotal roles, which is again in turn going to make it easier to deal with them because it's less Harley Quinns on the board. So in general, I like the fact that Harley Quinns are nerfed because I think they're not supposed to be more resilient than the Space Marines or AdMech, say. And they should be fast, unpredictable, cunning. That's how they should always be played. They should be a glass hammer. They should not be a hammer, which can withstand any amount of punishment and then still strike with unimaginable force. So we'll have to see how that impacts the game, but in general I do like this change, especially considering that Space Marines are severely weakened by the fact that they no longer get the Armor of Contempt. And speaking of the devil, so Space Marines, apart from across-the-board price reductions, which we're going to discuss in more detail at the end of the video, they also get easier manipulations of doctrines. So now you can stay in the doctrine for as long as you want, and I think that's how it was initially in 8th edition. I don't remember clearly because it was a long time ago, but I think that's how it worked, and then they changed it to doctrines being changed automatically, which doesn't really work with the idea of flexible adaptiveness that the Space Marines should have, and that's what they, I think, mentioned in the Warhammer community article. And I think it's a good change because it'll allow armies to get the benefit of the Devastator Doctrine no matter what the opponent does in the first turn, because in some games, especially where the Doctrine really matters and the extra point of AP matters, opponent could just hide for an extra turn and wait until your Doctrine changes to the tactical one and then come out. That's quite a rare play, I think, but it still existed, and I don't think it should work like that. Problem with this change is that it's still difficult to get to the Assault Doctrine, and that's the one that a lot of armies actually need to get to, because not all the Space Marines actually rely on the Devastator. It was very popular back in 8th edition where the terrain wasn't as harsh, and it was easier to draw the line of sight to the opponent, so the shooting phase was the most important one. And another change we get is that the troops units Space Marines get the sticky objectives rule, which means that after you leave an objective that you've captured with your troops unit, that objective stays under your control until your opponent recaptures it. That one is actually very, very advantageous because it allows you to, especially in the end game when both armies are depleted, and I'm sure if you've played Warhammer long enough, you have had that situation when you need to capture this objective, but you need also to stay on that objective because you've just captured it and you need that for your next turn primary, and you don't have an extra unit to go on to the further objective. You could use this one, but then you would not have the objective you're currently standing on. So you have a dilemma. So obviously you don't want to leave the objective whenever you capture it straight away. Sometimes you need to stand there to protect it. However, that's an extra level of tactical flexibility, and it's always great. Next are the Flamers of Tzeentch. So demons have received some buffs and debuffs in terms of points, But the most important change that I was personally looking forwards to, because I knew that it's coming, it was obvious for anyone who has seen any games of the demons of the Tzeentch, is that flamers are going to be nerfed in some fashion, either in this fashion that they've finally decided on, or just being points increased into oblivion. And they decided to go the other route. So they are no longer actually flamers. They are hitting with a ballistic skill of 3+, which is understandable. They are Tzeentch, so they should be pretty good in shooting. However, it's nothing compared to being able to auto hit. It's not only the fact that they will be now missing a third of their shots. It also means that they cannot advance and auto hit. It also means that they no longer ignore -1 to hit penalties and transhuman to hit abilities, which are actually very popular everywhere in the game. And the best part is that they are no longer an Overwatch nightmare for everyone, because before, charging them was just an automatic death for a lot of stuff and being severely punished for everything else. And now they'll only get 5 hits on average from a unit of 5 models, which is not bad, but it's nothing compared to 30 or even more hits with the auto-hitting ability. It's a very good change, and I think it'll give people more incentive to try other stuff, that Tzeentch actually have some nice, interesting units, and the Screamers, for example, they have received a points decrease, so maybe people will start bringing them more, and they were already pretty good. Now we have a trio of small rules changes. So first is the Eternities, which is again a change I really was looking forward to. I'm not sure why they waited so long to implement this. It was obvious right from the start, and every Eternity player kept using this thing, and now it's no longer the case. So overrun stratagem, which allowed your Flyrant, your Winged Hive Tyrant, however you call him, to fly, charge a unit, and then if he was able to successfully destroy that unit, fly away however many, I think it's 16 inches into your line. So basically be untouchable most of the game, which is not how it's supposed to be. And thankfully now that stratagem is only reserved for core units. And another change, which again I don't know why they've missed it and it was obvious for so long, is that the Biovores, the Harpies and the Sporocysts now have to pay for their little offspring, all those spore mines and all that they produce, because, well, it's what everyone else does in the game. And it's obvious that you should not be getting a whole bunch of free stuff, because that was left in 7th edition. And anyone who played that or have heard stories about that knows what it means when you get a whole bunch of free stuff on the tabletop in Warhammer. It's no good. So now it's gone, and I'm very glad about that. Next are the Creations of Bile. Now they only fight on death on a roll of a 4+. Probably a justified change. I have not personally met the Creations of Bile on the tabletop, so I cannot say, but probably having an army-wide fight on death rule, in addition to having +1 strength and other cool abilities the Creations of Bile have, like their stratagems, which are awesome, especially the advanced and charge one, which I really appreciate. It's probably too much, and 4+ is still very strong, especially if something like a possessed unit. If you kill all of them, 5 of them are fighting back, and that's scary, but at least it's not all 10. Next are the Necrons. You can no longer combo the OBSEC Dynasty with the Circumstances of Awakening options with any of them. So if you really want that OBSEC, you must only take that OBSEC. I don't know why would you do that if you have the same ability on the Nihilak Dynasty, where you also get, in addition to that, ignore AP1 if you are in your deployment zone. I don't know why would you do that. It's just strictly worse now, as far as I understand it. But yeah, that's how the rules are now. And probably you would now choose one of the main dynasties instead, either Novak or the already mentioned Nihilak. And it means that the Necron warriors are back to being very important, because we actually need that OBSEC, or you are left to using the Nihilak or that dynasty, the Optic dynasty we are all so used to. And the last change in the balanced data slate that I want to discuss is the Adeptus Mechanicus changes. So the Cataphron Breachers and the Cataphron Destroyers get the core keyword. That's great because core keyword is what holds all the important synergies in it, and that's great. I like that. I really want to start my own Adeptus Mechanicus army. I don't have the space on my painting desk now for that, but I will get to them in some time, and that's a good change. I like that, and I've always loved the Cataphron Breachers, Cataphron Destroyers, the look of the models, how chunky they are, so I'm glad that they've received this change. And the next is the Bionics Invulnerable save goes up to 5+ Invulnerable, which is very helpful for the Skitarii troops, the Ballistari, and those Cataphron Breachers, Cataphron Destroyers. It's good, especially considering that the high AP weapons are going to be ever more popular now in the meta, so you gotta have some protection against all that. And with all the discounts that AdMech have received, they are looking very strong again. So now let's quickly run through the points changes. So here are the highlights that we had on the Warhammer community website, and I'll just comment what we have here. So in terms of Space Marines, I've carefully looked through everything they have, and basically everything received a discount apart from I think Assault Centurions and maybe 1 or 2 other units. So it was a 15 to 20% discount across the board. You get a lot of stuff, more stuff now for your points, which is understandable because Armor of Contempt gives you about that much survivability more. One of the most interesting things is that the discounts are sometimes baked into the price in the form of the war gear. So, for example, the Venerable Dreadnought, which I previously had to pay 20 points to bring a las cannon. That's why I didn't. I brought a multi-melta or a heavy plasma cannon, which was for free. Now I don't have to pay points for anything. I can just take the 20 points previously las cannon, and that would cost me the same. Same goes for the Heavy Flamer, Underslung Heavy Flamer, which I've never used on the Venerable Dreadnought because it was just too expensive, and why would I pay 5 points for it? Now it's free, so I can consider changing my Stormbolter to that because I think Heavy Flamer is slightly better than a Stormbolter. And the same goes for the Redemptor, the Icarus Rocket Pod. Previously I had to pay for it, that's why I didn't take it. Now it's inbuilt into the price, and you still have to pay 185 points for the Redemptor, but now you don't have to pay extra for the Onslaught or the Icarus Rocket Pod. And that list goes on and on. So apart from units just being cheaper, most of them, Redemptors did not get a straight price decrease for the body. They got only the war gear part. So everything is either cheaper or gets free war gear or both. That is very interesting because it allows us to play more with some of the war gear choices we never used to have. For example, now if you run the Intercessors, which as I predicted in my Arcs of Omen video, we now have less incentive to actually take the Intercessors because you can just skip the troops and go straight to elites. But now you can actually get a Thunderhammer on your Sergeant, Intercessor Charge Sergeant for free. You don't have to pay anything for that, which means that they are slightly better than they used to be. And all other war gear, which is not that much, but you still can have that for free. And the prices have also decreased, so the Assault Intercessors now only cost 17 points instead of the 19 that they used to cost. So that cheap or free war gear game that started with Plague Marines and Thousand Sons a few months ago, now it's spread to the main Space Marine book, and it's exciting to see how that will pan out. I really want to try some things that I previously have never ever used, like my example with the Flamer on the Venerable Dreadnought. Pretty much the same treatment received the Adeptus Mechanicus, so their vehicles get a price decrease, and the troop choices, the war gear, all the same stuff. So they now simply cost less, which again means a lot of good for players who like Adeptus Mechanicus. I think that Adeptus Mechanicus are a really strong army and still are. There's a reason why they were such a menace at the start of 9th edition or the start of the Codex, and I hope that Games Workshop did not overdo it here and have not brought them back to the same level where they will be torturing everyone on the tabletop. Before I forget, the Leagues of Votann have also received some price increases, so the Berserkers have increased in price, The Hackathon Land Fortress has also increased in price. So slight increases, nothing really major, but considering that the balance of points is usually very careful, especially with players who know what they're doing, that might mean that you would have to sacrifice something to have the list that you want. The Chaos Space Marines have also received some discounts and on the war gear and for the vehicles, especially the Legiones Astartes, their main troops. So now all the war gear that you used to pay for is free, everything except for the Balefire Tome, which obviously cannot be free because it makes one of you guys a Psyker, and that would be too much to have like 3 units of Psychic troops in your army. Abaddon unfortunately got a points hike, so he's now 350 points, and if my memory serves me well, I think he was 300 before, so a slight bump, and probably he deserves that because he's just very good. In terms of other types of Chaos Space Marines, the Heretic Astartes, Thousand Suns have received some minor price decreases, nothing major because obviously they're very strong. And even without the Armor of Contempt, they're still very strong because they have their invulnerable save. So even when the save part fails, they still have an invulnerable save. So I'm absolutely fine with them not receiving any major decreases because they are in a good place already. The Death Guard is pretty much the same story. They've received some more discounts on their characters for obvious reason. Now the characters are more vulnerable without that Armor of Contempt. It's ever easier to kill them, and the Plague Marines are also cheaper now again to give you an incentive to take them because you have your Blightlord Terminators which have the OPSEC and are better than the Plague Marines in general, and now they're even better still because they have that 4-up invulnerable save and 2-up save, which Plague Marines obviously don't have. So 19 points for Plague Marines is probably justified with free war gear, so they're just dirt cheap now. Mephitic Blight Haulers are now 5 points cheaper each, which is, I guess, understandable. I always thought that they should be slightly cheaper than the Filtered Below drones. Both Magnus and Mortarion are still the same price, so why that is the case, I don't know. I don't think Mortarion is worth the price, especially Magnus isn't worth his price now, and that part should hopefully change in the future. So demons have received some discounts on units like Blood Crushers and Plague Bearers, which I'm happy about because I like the diversity of the demons. I didn't like the fact that Flamers were so good and their price remained unchanged, so that's great. Tyranids have received some significant increases to their prices, especially for units like Carnifex and Zoanthropes, as the Warhammer community article points out. So they want us to play the Horde-style Tyranid armies, which I generally do support because I think that's how Tyranids look their best. And I still think that Carnifexes will be viable, it'll be more incentive to play a balanced army instead of just a wall of Carnifex -1 damage goodness. And a very similar treatment with the Ginster Cults to the Space Marines, cheaper war gear, cheaper units, more points to play with. Necrons have received some minor points decreases. The Monolith, for example, is now 270 points, which I find very fun. It's like they just don't want to make Monolith more survivable. They just want to make it the price of a chair so that you can buy 50 in your army instead of just making the Monolith better than it is now. And the Necron Warriors are now cheaper than they were before. Some other units are, but the best of the best, so like the Scorpack Destroyers and the Citan or Khitan Shards or our favorite Lich Guard, they are the same as they were. Tau have received some minor points increases, so like +5 points for the Crisis Bodyguards, +5 for the Crisis Battlesuits, +10 for the Cold Star Commander, same for the Crisis Commander and the Enforcer Commander, and the Ethereal on anything, so like the Hover Drone or whatnot, the same thing. I don't think it's going to weaken Tau in any significant way, and on the contrary, I think Tau are now in a very good position because their main opponents, the Space Marines, have received a nerf in terms of the losing the Armor of Contempt. Yes, we have more units to play with now, but Tau I think with their firepower, they didn't really care that much. So yeah, Armor of Contempt is great, but they could destroy Space Marines very well. And now they'll have even easier time doing that. So we'll have to see about that, if my prediction is correct or not. So that's it, guys. This video was quite long because there are a lot of changes. Obviously, I have definitely missed something and did not discuss it. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below and I'll be glad to answer them, and I'll see you next time.